History remembers kings and conquerors, warriors and emperors, but what about the women who pulled the strings from behind the throne? Think of Cleopatra, whose political brilliance kept Rome at bay, or Empress Wu Zetian, the only woman to rule China in her own name. These iconic figures are just the beginning. Beneath the surface of ancient empires lies a hidden network of 30 cunning women who shaped the course of history through manipulation, strategy, and sheer force of will. They didn't always wear crowns, but their influence echoed through the halls of power, steering the fate of nations. How did they do it? What secrets did they possess that allowed them to command armies, sway rulers, and outmaneuver rivals in a world dominated by men? Picture this, a royal court where whispered alliances hold more weight than swords, where a carefully placed word can topple dynasties. These women weren't just bystanders, they were master tacticians. Some wielded charm like a weapon, others played the long game of diplomacy, and a few ruled from the shadows with an iron grip. Their stories are buried beneath layers of myth and omission, dismissed as mere consorts or schemers. But today, we're peeling back those layers to reveal the truth. This isn't just about queens and empresses. It's about the advisors, the mothers, the spies, the unsung architects of empires. So what can we learn from their playbook? How did they navigate a world that sought to silence them? Over the course of this journey, we'll uncover the strategies that kept them in power, the alliances they forged, and the legacies they left behind. From the palaces of Byzantium to the war rooms of ancient Persia, these women redefined what it meant to rule. Their methods were as diverse as their cultures, but one thread connects them all: an unshakable understanding of human nature. Ready to step into their world, let's begin. History often paints powerful women as anomalies, exceptions to the rule in societies where men held the reins. But dig deeper and you'll find a pattern. These women weren't outliers. They were strategists who mastered the art of bending rigid systems to their will. Take Hatshepsut, the woman who declared herself pharaoh in an Egypt that saw kingship as inherently male. She didn't just rule, she rewrote the script, commissioning statues that depicted her with a false beard and masculine features, a brilliant act of political theater to legitimize her power. Yet after her death, her monuments were defaced, her name scrubbed from records. Why? Because her very existence threatened the narrative of male dominance. This erasure wasn't unique to Egypt. Across ancient empires, women who wielded influence were systematically downplayed, labeled as seductresses, schemers, or mere consorts. Their achievements were attributed to the men around them, their agency stripped away by historians who couldn't reconcile their power with societal expectations. But here's the truth: these women didn't just navigate male-dominated systems, they hacked them. They used every tool at their disposal: marriage alliances, religious authority, even gossip, to carve out spaces of control. In Persia, Queen Parissotis turned the royal harem into a shadow court, orchestrating assassinations and succession plots with chilling precision. In Rome, Agrippina the Younger manipulated her son Nero into power, only to be murdered when her influence grew too visible. What united them wasn't just intelligence or ambition, but an uncanny understanding of the unspoken rules of their worlds. They knew when to flatter and when to intimidate, when to step forward and when to vanish into the background. Their stories weren't just about personal triumph, they were blueprints for survival in societies that sought to erase them. And now, as we piece together the fragments they left behind, we begin our first deep dive into the life of a woman who mastered this delicate dance, the Byzantine Empress Theodora, a former actress who turned scandal into sovereignty. Her rise wasn't just unlikely, it was unthinkable, and that's exactly what made it brilliant. Theodora of Byzantium began life as the daughter of a bear keeper in Constantinople's hippodrome, a world of sawdust and spectacle, far removed from the gilded halls of power. Yet by her 30s, she stood beside Emperor Justinian as his co-ruler, wielding influence that reshaped an empire. How did a woman from the lowest rung of Byzantine society climb so high? The answer lies in her razor-sharp wit, an unshakable grasp of human nature, and a willingness to bend the rules of a rigidly hierarchical world. As a young actress, Theodora knew the power of performance. The stage taught her how to command attention, to read a room, to turn whispers into momentum. These weren't just theatrical skills, they were political weapons. When she caught Justinian's eye, she didn't merely become his lover, she became his strategist. Even as scandalized aristocrats sneered at her past, Theodora leveraged her outsider status. She understood the streets, the mobs, the pulse of the city in a way palace-born nobles never could. And when the Nika riots erupted in 532, with half of Constantinople in flames and senators plotting to overthrow Justinian, it was Theodora who refused to flee. Her famous speech, recorded by the historian Procopius, ringing through the palace, "Royal purple is the noblest shroud." With those words, she stiffened Justinian's resolve. The rebellion was crushed, and her place at the center of power was cemented. But Theodora's genius wasn't just in crisis management. She rewrote the rules for women in Byzantium, pushing laws that banned forced prostitution and granted wives more control over property. Procopius, torn between admiration and disdain, called her shrewder than any man, yet painted her as manipulative in his scandalous secret history. This duality reveals the tension at the heart of her legacy. A woman who dared to rule in her own right would always be seen as either a saint or a schemer. Her real masterstroke, turning weakness into strength. Where others saw the stain of her acting career, she saw a network. Former colleagues became informants. Theater guilds morphed into intelligence networks. Every laugh she'd shared in the green rooms of Constantinople now bought loyalty in its back alleys. Theodora didn't just rise to power, she reimagined what power could look like for a woman who refused to play by the old rules. And as Byzantium's golden age unfolded under her and Justinian's reign, one truth became clear. The Empress who'd once danced for crowds now made emperors dance to her tune. Agrippina the Younger didn't just navigate Rome's cutthroat political arena, she rewrote its rules with a mother's ambition and a killer's precision. Born into the Julio-Claudian dynasty, she understood power wasn't inherited, it was seized. Her life became a masterclass in climbing Rome's greasy pole, using every tool at her disposal: marriage, poison, and the ultimate pawn, her own son. When her brother Caligula exiled her for alleged treason, she didn't wither. She observed, plotting her return like a general studying a battlefield. By the time her uncle Claudius became emperor, Agrippina was ready. She married him, despite being his niece, a union so scandalous, Rome had to change its laws to allow it. Tacitus paints her as a woman who could not be stopped by honor or cruelty. She cleared Nero's path to the throne with chilling efficiency, Claudius's son Britannicus. Poisoned at a dinner, rival senators silenced or sidelined. Even Claudius himself allegedly fell to her infamous mushroom dish, though ancient sources whisper it was a feather dipped in toxin that finished him. When Nero was crowned at 17, Agrippina expected to rule through him. She demanded a seat beside him at state functions, even appeared on coins sharing his profile, a brazen claim to equal power. But here's the tragic twist: the puppet master became the pawn. Nero, raised in a court where betrayal was breakfast, turned on her. He tried to drown her in a collapsible boat, then sent assassins when she swam ashore. Tacitus records her last furious words, "Strike here," pointing to her womb that bore him. Her ambition forged an emperor, but it also forged the instrument of her destruction. Was her downfall inevitable, or did she underestimate the monster she'd created? Agrippina's story echoes beyond Rome, because while she schemed in marble halls, another woman was mastering empire from the shadows, a strategist who turned Persia's royal harem into a throne room of her own. Her name, Parissotis, and her game of poison and patronage would make even Agrippina pause. Cixi's rise from low-ranking concubine to the shadow ruler of China's Qing dynasty reads like a masterclass in ruthless political survival. At 16, she entered the Forbidden City as one of Emperor Xianfeng's minor consorts, a position so insignificant, history might never have remembered her name. Yet when Xianfeng died in 1861, leaving their 5-year-old son as heir, Cixi staged a lightning coup. With the help of loyal generals, she seized the regency, sidelining rival advisors and the boy's own Empress Dowager. This was no mere power grab. It was a redefinition of what a woman could achieve in a system designed to keep her silent. For the next 47 years, whether from behind silk screens or the throne itself, Cixi pulled the strings of an empire in decline. Western cartoons dubbed her the Dragon Lady, painting her as a tyrant who hoarded jewels while China crumbled. But the truth, far more complex. She crushed rivals with cold efficiency, allegedly poisoning her nephew, the Guangxu Emperor, when his reforms threatened her control, yet also pushed modernization, building railways and telegraph lines. She played factions like a grand chessboard, conservative mandarins against progressive reformers, provincial governors against foreign diplomats. When the Boxer Rebellion spiraled into disaster, Cixi deftly shifted blame, fleeing Beijing in a peasant cart only to return stronger. Chinese historians still debate her legacy. Was she the last defender of a dying empire or the architect of its downfall? What's undeniable is her genius for reinvention. In a world where Confucian tradition barred women from ruling openly, Cixi didn't just bend the rules, she made them irrelevant. Her reign proved that even in the most rigid systems, power isn't given. It's taken, and as the Qing dynasty teetered, another woman halfway across the world was proving the same point, not with silken intrigue but with steel. Enter Tamar of Georgia, the warrior queen who turned a fractured kingdom into an empire. Olympias wasn't just Alexander the Great's mother. She was his first strategist, his spiritual guide, and some would argue the architect of his destiny. While history remembers Alexander's conquests, few recognize the woman who molded him through a potent mix of mysticism and sheer political cunning. Born into the royal house of Epirus, Olympias was no ordinary queen. Ancient historians like Plutarch describe her as a devotee of Dionysus, sleeping with snakes coiled around her limbs in rituals that terrified even her husband, King Philip II of Macedon. This wasn't mere eccentricity, it was theater. In a world where power was often decided by the sword, Olympias wielded something far more potent, the aura of divine connection. Her rivalry with Philip's other wives became the stuff of legend. When Philip married Cleopatra Eurydice, a woman young enough to bear him a new heir, Olympias didn't just seethe in silence. She orchestrated, after Philip's assassination at their daughter's wedding by a bodyguard with possible ties to Olympias, Cleopatra and her infant were swiftly eliminated. Coincidence? Ancient sources whisper of poison, a tool Olympias allegedly mastered, but her true influence lay in Alexander's psyche. She filled his childhood with tales of his divine lineage, claiming he was the son not of Philip but of Zeus himself. This wasn't just bedtime storytelling, it was psychological warfare. By the time Alexander marched into Persia, he carried an unshakable belief in his own godhood, a conviction that fueled his daring campaigns and bound his men to him with near religious fervor. Yet Olympia's ambition had a darker edge. After Alexander's death, her relentless maneuvering to protect his legacy, ordering the execution of rival heirs, even his own half-brother, plunged Macedon into chaos. Was she a visionary who shaped history's greatest conqueror, or a destabilizing force whose meddling fractured an empire? The answer lies somewhere in the smoke of her sacred rites. Because while Alexander crossed continents, Olympias proved that the most powerful battles were often fought not on distant battlefields, but in the shadows of royal courts. And as one empire crumbled under the weight of her schemes, another woman was mastering a different kind of spiritual manipulation, one that didn't rely on snakes or swords, but on the whispered prophecies of an oracle's chamber. Jezebel's name has become synonymous with wickedness, a cautionary tale of feminine corruption. But peel back the layers of biblical condemnation, and you'll find a queen who wielded power with terrifying efficiency in a kingdom that despised her for it. Born a Phoenician princess, she married King Ahab of Israel, bringing with her the worship of Baal and the political savvy of Tyre's merchant princes. The Old Testament paints her as a villain, ordering the execution of Yahweh's prophets, defying Elijah, and meeting a gruesome end tossed from a window. But what if her real crime wasn't cruelty but cultural disruption? Israel's priests saw her as a threat because she understood something they didn't. Religion was politics. By importing Baal's priests and building temples, she wasn't just practicing her faith, she was consolidating power. The Baal cult came with trade networks, Phoenician alliances, and economic clout. Jezebel wasn't some fanatic, she was a pragmatist playing a long game. Even the infamous Naboth's vineyard incident, where she orchestrated a land grab for Ahab, reveals her mastery of legal subterfuge. She didn't just take the vineyard, she manufactured a blasphemy charge to justify it, exploiting Israel's own laws. Yet history is written by the winners, and Jezebel's legacy was crafted by those who overthrew her dynasty. The Bible's visceral descriptions, her painted eyes, her defiant last act of applying makeup before death, were meant to symbolize vanity and hubris. But read differently, they're signs of a woman who refused to relinquish control, even in her final moments. Modern archaeologists have found evidence of Israel's thriving economy under Ahab, suggesting Jezebel's reign wasn't the moral wasteland Scripture describes. Her story forces us to ask, when does a queen become a monster? When she breaks the rules, or when she breaks the wrong people's rules? Because while Jezebel was being demonized, another queen was using religion to her advantage in a very different way. Hatshepsut, who didn't challenge Egypt's gods but became one. Fredigund's story begins in the shadows, a servant girl in the court of Frankish King Chilperic, where power wasn't won but clawed from the wreckage of fallen rivals. By the time she died in 597, she'd left a trail of bodies so vast that even the chronicler Gregory of Tours, who loathed her, couldn't hide a grudging awe at her audacity. How did a woman with no royal blood become the most feared ruler in Gaul? The answer lies in a simple, brutal truth. Fredigund understood that in the cutthroat world of the Merovingians, mercy was the quickest path to a grave. Her ascent started with seduction. Chilperic's queen, the Visigothic princess Galswintha, stood in her way until she was found strangled in her bed. Gregory's account leaves little doubt who benefited most. With Galswintha gone, Fredigund became queen, but her stepsons remained threats. What followed was a masterclass in elimination. Prince Merovich, driven to suicide after she turned his allies against him. Prince Clovis, accused of treason and stabbed in his sleep. even her own daughter Rigund allegedly faced assassination when she grew too ambitious. Fredigund didn't just play the Game of Thrones, she burned the board and ruled over the ashes. Yet calling her a mere murderer misses the depth of her strategy. Every corpse served a purpose. When her infant sons died, likely of natural causes, she spun their deaths into propaganda, accusing rivals of witchcraft. She even turned her own attempted assassination into a weapon, using the wound to justify purges. Gregory, a bishop who saw her as the devil incarnate, still recorded her genius for turning chaos into control. After Chilperic's murder in 584, she ruled as regent for their son Clothar, outmaneuvering aristocratic factions by bribing some and butchering others. Was Fredigund a monster, or a mother fighting to protect her child in a world where weakness meant death? The question lingers because her methods worked. In an era when Merovingian kings were puppets of warlords, she held power for over a decade, a lifetime by 6th century standards. Her reign proves a dark truth. In certain courts, survival wasn't about virtue. It was about who wielded fear more deftly, and as Frankish nobles learned too late, no one wielded it like Fredigund. But while she ruled with daggers and deception, another woman was proving power could be won with a very different weapon, the art of diplomacy, wielded by a queen who turned words into armies. Elina of Aquitaine didn't just wear 2 crowns, she shattered the mold for what a medieval queen could be. At 15, she inherited a territory richer than the French crown itself. By 19, she was Queen of France, only to divorce Louis VII and marry Henry Plantagenet, who would become King of England. Overnight, she went from ruling one kingdom to influencing 2, her lands stretching from the Scottish borders to the Pyrenees. But Elina wasn't content to be a trophy wife or a silent consort. She transformed courts into cultural powerhouses, turning troubadours' songs of courtly love into political tools that celebrated female agency, a radical idea in the 12th century. Her rebellion against Henry II wasn't just a marital spat, it was a calculated strike for power. When Henry's infidelities and authoritarian rule became unbearable, Elina didn't retreat, she rallied her sons against him. For a medieval queen to openly defy her king was unthinkable, and Henry's retaliation was brutal, 15 years of imprisonment. Yet even in confinement, Elina's influence never waned. Letters slipped past guards, alliances were quietly nurtured, and when Henry died, she emerged not as a broken prisoner, but as the architect of her son Richard the Lionheart's reign. As regent during his crusades, she governed England with a stateswoman's skill, negotiating with rebels and even crossing the Alps at nearly 70 to secure Richard's bride, Berengaria of Navarre. What makes Elina extraordinary isn't just her resilience, it's her ability to turn every setback into a strategic advantage. Her courtly love traditions, once dismissed as frivolous poetry, became a subtle critique of feudal marriage constraints. Her imprisonment, meant to silence her, only cemented her legend, and when her granddaughter Blanche of Castile faced her own battles as regent of France, she drew directly from Elina's playbook. Because Elina proved something revolutionary, a queen could lose her freedom, even her crown, but never her voice, and in the shadow of her legacy, another woman was preparing to wield that same voice not through poetry or prison, but through the sheer force of heresy. Meet Marguerite Porete, the mystic who turned theology into treason. Enzinga of Ndongo didn't just resist the Portuguese Empire, she outmaneuvered it for 4 decades, turning a small African kingdom into a fortress of defiance. When she first faced Portuguese negotiators in 1622, they expected a compliant queen. Instead, they met a strategist who refused to sit on the floor while they lounged in chairs. With a single gesture commanding her servant to kneel as her seat, she declared equality with her adversaries. This wasn't just pride, it was psychological warfare. Enzinga knew symbolism was power, and she wielded it masterfully. Her reign began in crisis. The Portuguese, hungry for slaves and land, had already driven her brother to suicide. Enzinga took the throne with enemies on all sides, European colonizers to the west, rival tribes to the east, and dissenters within her own court. Her response? A dazzling blend of diplomacy and brute force. She converted to Christianity temporarily, adopting the name Dona Ana de Sousa to secure allies, then later abandoned the faith when it suited her. She formed strategic marriages not for love, but for military alliances, even marrying the leader of the fierce Imbangola warriors to bolster her armies. On the battlefield, she fought alongside her troops, dressed in male attire, wielding a battle axe to shatter gender norms and inspire loyalty. But Enzinga's true genius lay in playing empires against each other. She invited Dutch traders to counter Portuguese influence, turning Angola into a proxy war between European powers. When the Dutch were expelled, she pivoted again, sheltering runaway slaves and offering them land in exchange for military service. Her capital, Matamba, became a haven for resistance, a place where African autonomy thrived under her iron will. Even in her 70s, she led raids, proving age and gender were no match for her tactical brilliance. What makes Enzinga extraordinary isn't just her military prowess, it's her fluidity. She embraced masculine symbols when they served her, holding court with male concubines dressed as women to emphasize her authority. Yet she also leveraged her identity as a mother figure, portraying herself as the protector of her people. The Portuguese called her a witch and tyrant, but to Angola, she was the lioness who never bowed. By the time of her death in 1663, she'd secured recognition of Ndongo's sovereignty, a feat few could claim against colonial might. And as Enzinga's legacy echoed across Africa, another woman was forging her own path of resistance half a world away, in the jungles of India. Meet Rani Abaka, the pirate queen who defied Portugal's naval empire with nothing but a fleet of fishing boats and unbreakable resolve. Roxolana entered the Ottoman court as a captive, a young girl ripped from her Ruthenian homeland and sold into slavery. Yet by the time of her death, she'd rewritten the rules of an empire, transforming from a concubine to Suleiman, the magnificent's legal wife and most trusted advisor. No woman before her had dared to cross that line. The harem was meant to be a gilded cage, its inhabitants silent and disposable. But Roxolana, known as Harem Sultan, turned it into a seat of power. How? By mastering the art of visibility in a system designed to keep women hidden. While other concubines faded into the background after bearing children, Roxolana refused to disappear. She composed letters to Suleiman when he was on campaign, blending poetry with political counsel, a bold move that kept her in his thoughts even from hundreds of miles away. When rivals like Mahidevran, mother of Suleiman's eldest son, tried to isolate her, Roxolana countered with calculated generosity. She funded mosques, bathhouses, and soup kitchens across Istanbul, crafting a public image as a benevolent force while her rivals relied solely on palace intrigue. Her charity wasn't just kindness, it was branding. In a city where the Sultan's power was absolute, Roxolana made herself indispensable to its people. Her greatest coup marriage. No sultan had wed a former concubine in centuries, but Roxolana convinced Suleiman to break tradition. The wedding wasn't just romantic, it was a political earthquake. As his wife, she gained unprecedented access, attending state meetings behind a screen, influencing foreign policy, even corresponding with kings like Poland's Sigismund II. Venetian ambassadors, stunned by her influence, called her the most powerful woman in Ottoman history. But Roxolana's end game was survival. When her son Selim's path to the throne was threatened, she didn't hesitate to neutralize rivals. Some historians whisper of poisoned figs and staged coups, though proof remains elusive. What's certain is that by the time Suleiman died, Roxolana's legacy was secure. She'd proven that in the Ottoman court, the pen and the perfume-laced letter could be mightier than the sword, yet for all her brilliance, Roxolana still played by the empire's rules. The next woman on our list defied them entirely, a pirate queen who built her own kingdom on the high seas, answering to no sultan or sovereign. Her name: Sayyida Al-Hura, the Mediterranean's untamed storm. Thomaris of the Massageti wasn't just a queen, she was the nightmare that haunted Cyrus the Great's final days. Herodotus tells the tale like something from a myth. The Persian conqueror, who'd spent decades building history's largest empire, finally meeting his match in a steppe queen who didn't just defeat him but turned his own arrogance into his downfall. When Cyrus tricked her army by leaving behind a poisoned feast, slaughtering her son Spargepizes in the chaos, Thomaris didn't mourn. She promised vengeance in words that echo across 2,500 years. I warned you to rule your own people and let me rule mine. Now I'll give you your fill of blood. And when her forces ambushed Cyrus's exhausted troops, she allegedly plunged his severed head into a wineskin filled with it, a grisly rebuke to a king who thought himself invincible. But how much of this is history and how much is Herodotus spinning legend? Modern scholars debate the details. Some argue Cyrus died fighting the Scythians, not Thomaris, yet the story's endurance reveals a deeper truth. In a world where empires swallowed cultures whole, Thomaris became the ultimate symbol of resistance, a mother who turned grief into a weapon. Unlike Cleopatra or Agrippina, who navigated courts, Thomaris ruled a nomadic people where women fought alongside men. Her power wasn't just political, it was visceral, born from the saddle and the sword. Compare her to Boudica, who torched Roman Londinium after her daughters were violated, or Zenobia of Palmyra, who marched on Egypt to avenge her husband's death. These warrior queens shared a playbook transforming personal loss into collective rage. But Thomaris stands apart because she didn't just win a battle, she humiliated history's greatest conqueror. Cyrus, who toppled Babylon and freed the Jews, was reduced to a cautionary tale about underestimating women. The irony: his Persian successors would face another queen even more cunning, one who didn't need bloodshed to bend empires to her will. Enter Artemisia of Caria, the naval commander who outthought kings with nothing but a map and her wits. Boudica's rage wasn't just personal, it was a wildfire that consumed Roman Britain. When Roman soldiers flogged her and violated her daughters, they underestimated the queen of the Iceni. This wasn't merely an insult to her family, it was a spark in dry tinder. The Celts had endured Roman taxation, land seizures, and the humiliation of client kingship, but Boudica transformed their simmering resentment into a revolt that nearly drove Rome from the island. Tacitus records her towering presence before battle, her fiery red hair streaming as she rallied tribes with a speech that cut to the core of colonial injustice: win this battle or perish. That is what I, a woman, plan to do. Let the men live in slavery if they will. Her words weren't just rhetoric, they were a mirror held up to the fractured pride of a conquered people. The rebellion was as brutal as it was brilliant. Boudica's forces didn't just defeat Roman legions, they erased their presence. Londinium, Verulamium, Camulogenum Roman cities were reduced to ash layers archaeologists still uncover today. The Celts left no bystanders, temples were desecrated, civilians slaughtered. Roman historians painted this as savagery, but modern scholars see a calculated message. Boudica wasn't just fighting soldiers. She was erasing the idea of Rome itself from British soil. Her gender amplified her symbolism. To the Celts, she embodied the earth goddess Andrast, a divine avenger. To the Romans, she was unnatural, a mother-turned-warlord, violating their rigid gender norms. Yet Boudica's legacy is a paradox. The Romans who vilified her also immortalized her. Cassius Dio wrote of her towering chariot, her piercing gaze, her voice like thunder. These descriptions, meant to terrify, inadvertently crowned her a legend. Today, British schoolchildren learn her name alongside Churchill and Elizabeth I, a testament to how rebellion can be reclaimed as patriotism. But the real Boudica remains elusive. Was she a freedom fighter or a doomed rebel, a grieving mother or a tactical genius? Perhaps she was all of them, a woman who channeled personal trauma into a war that shook an empire. Her story ends not with a climactic last stand, but with silence. Defeated at the Battle of Watling Street, she likely took poison rather than face capture. Yet in death, she achieved what no male Celtic leader had. She became unforgettable. And as Rome stamped out her revolt, another woman was proving that resistance didn't always require fire and bloodshed. Sometimes the deadliest weapons were patience and parchment tools wielded masterfully by the Byzantine spymaster Theodora's lesser-known counterpart, Anicia Juliana. Irene of Athens didn't just break the Byzantine Empire's glass ceiling, she shattered it with a brutality that stunned even the medieval world. As the first woman to rule the empire in her own name, she faced a problem no male emperor had ever encountered: a son who refused to stay in his place. When her boy, Constantine VI, came of age, tradition demanded she step aside, but Irene had other plans. What followed wasn't just a power struggle, it was a masterclass in cold calculation. First, she undermined Constantine's authority by insisting on co-ruling, her name stamped beside his on every decree. Then, when he dared to assert independence, she had him captured, dragged to the purple chamber where he'd been born, and blinded with such precision that he survived, maimed but alive, forever disqualified from ruling by Byzantine law. The message was clear: in Irene's empire, even maternal love bowed to ambition. Yet this same woman who mutilated her child also saved Byzantium's soul. For decades, the empire had been torn apart by iconoclasm, the violent destruction of religious icons ordered by earlier emperors. Irene didn't just reverse the policy, she orchestrated the Second Council of Nicaea in 787, declaring icon veneration sacred once more. Was this genuine piety or political theater? Historians still debate. On one hand, her restoration of icons won over the clergy and peasantry who'd clung to their forbidden images. On the other, it gave her a divine mandate no male rival could challenge. She even minted coins showing herself as the new Constantine, a direct link to the empire's Christian founder. Her boldest move, flirting with an unprecedented union between East and West. When Charlemagne was crowned Holy Roman Emperor on Christmas Day 800, the Byzantines saw it as theft of their ancient title. But Irene, now widowed, saw opportunity. Diplomats whispered of marriage proposals emerging of their empires that could have reshaped Europe. Whether she truly considered it or was merely playing for time remains unclear. What's certain is that her reign proved a woman could wield absolute power without a man's shadow. Yet Irene's downfall came from the same ruthlessness that built her throne. When her treasury emptied from bribes to the army and lavish gifts to monasteries, even her supporters turned. Deposed and exiled to Lesbos, she died in obscurity, a grim irony for the woman who'd once blinded her son to stay in power. Her legacy, a paradox, a mother who betrayed motherhood's every ideal yet preserved the religious heart of Byzantium. a ruler who dreamed of uniting Christendom but couldn't control her own court. And as Irene's story fades, another mother-son drama takes center stage, one where the roles are chillingly reversed. Enter Wu Zetian, the only woman to claim China's throne as emperor, who didn't just depose her sons, she allegedly strangled her own infant daughter to frame a rival. If Irene blurred the line between ruler and monster, Wu would erase it entirely. Wu Zetian didn't just climb China's imperial ladder, she kicked it down behind her, ensuring no one could follow. Born the daughter of a timber merchant, she entered Emperor Taizong's court as a low-ranking concubine at 14, her future seemingly written in invisible ink. Yet by 66, she'd done the unthinkable, declared herself emperor, the only woman in China's 3,000 years of dynasties to rule in her own name. Her path wasn't just paved with ambition, it was drenched in blood. Historians still whisper about the death of her infant daughter, an event so convenient it reeks of calculation. Did Wu smother the child herself to frame Empress Wang, her rival for Emperor Gaozong's affection? The Tang dynasty's chroniclers insist she did, painting her as a monster who sacrificed motherhood for power. But here's the twist, Wu's alleged crimes always served a purpose. Empress Wang, accused of the murder, was deposed, Gaozong's other consorts exiled or executed. Even Wu's own sons weren't safe. When Crown Prince Lai Hong began showing too much independence, he died suddenly after a meal with his mother, poison. The court certainly thought so, yet to dismiss Wu as merely ruthless misses her genius. She didn't just eliminate rivals, she rewrote the rules of power. While male emperors relied on aristocratic clans, Wu turned to the civil service exams, promoting scholars based on merit rather than birth. This wasn't just fairness, it was strategy. By elevating outsiders loyal only to her, she broke the nobility's stranglehold on government. Her propaganda machine was equally brilliant. When Confucian tradition declared women unfit to rule, Wu simply found another script. She became a patron of Buddhism, commissioning texts that portrayed her as the reincarnation of the future Buddha Maitreya. Giant stone carvings at Longmen grottos depicted her with the serene face of a deity, while her spies spread rumors of divine omens justifying her reign. Was she a tyrant? Undoubtedly, but consider the chaos she inherited, a Tang dynasty weakened by infighting and corruption. Wu's iron fist brought stability, even prosperity. She lowered taxes for peasants, funded public works, and expanded China's borders through military campaigns. Her reign saw the first recorded use of paper currency, centuries before Europe. The same woman who allegedly killed her daughter also established nurseries for orphan girls, a paradox that defines her legacy. Perhaps the most telling detail comes from her deathbed. At 81, forced to abdicate, she ordered her tombstone left blank, no epitaph, no titles, a final power play or acknowledgement that no words could capture a woman who defied every label. Because while Wu Zetian ruled alone, the next woman on our list proved you didn't need a throne to command an empire. Meet Theodora of Byzantium's shadow, the eunuch advisor Narses, whose brilliance on the battlefield was matched only by his patron Empress Sophia, the puppet master who pulled his strings. Catherine de' Medici arrived in France as a teenage bride, an outsider with no allies, and left it as the most feared woman in Europe. Widowed at 40, with 3 young sons on the throne and a kingdom tearing itself apart over religion, she didn't just navigate chaos, she weaponized it. History remembers her as the Black Queen, scheming behind the scenes of the St. Bartholomew's Day massacre, where thousands of Protestants were slaughtered in Paris's streets. But to reduce her to that single night is to miss the chilling brilliance of her rule. Because Catherine didn't just survive France's wars of religion, she orchestrated them like a grand chess master, sacrificing pawns to protect her dynasty. Take her infamous flying squadron, not soldiers, but a hand-picked group of beautiful women trained to seduce and spy on nobles. While male rulers relied on brute force, Catherine understood that pillow talk often carried farther than proclamations. Her network of informants stretched from royal bedrooms to foreign courts, turning intimacy into intelligence. Even her lavish parties were tactical. The elaborate ballets and fireworks she hosted weren't mere entertainment. They were psychological warfare, dazzling rivals into submission while masking her maneuvers. Then there's her architectural legacy, the Tuileries Palace, the expansion of the Louvre. These weren't vanity projects, they were statements of control. By reshaping Paris's skyline, she etched Medici power into stone. Her patronage of the arts, from tapestries to portraiture, crafted a narrative of divine right monarchy that elevated her sons above the squabbling factions. But the massacre haunts her legacy. When she ordered the assassination of Protestant leader Gaspar de Coligny, did she intend to spark a citywide bloodbath? Some historians argue she lost control. Others insist every drop was calculated to cripple the Huguenot threat. The truth may lie in between. Catherine wasn't a mindless butcher. She was a pragmatist who believed any means justified saving France's crown. Which forces us to ask, can ruthlessness be redeemed by results? Because while Catherine's methods were monstrous, her reign held a fractured kingdom together long enough for her son Henry IV to eventually declare tolerance. And as we grapple with that moral grey area, another woman waits in the wings, one whose own brutal calculus would reshape an empire across the sea. Her name: Nur Jahan, the Mughal empress who ruled India from behind a veil and proved that even in Persia, a woman's will could bend history. Hurrem's Sultan didn't just share Suleiman the Magnificent's bed, she reshaped the Ottoman Empire from within its most guarded sanctum. While Roxolana mastered visibility, Hurrem redefined the game entirely, turning the harem from a gilded cage into a command center. Born in Ruthenia, captured by slavers, and sold to Istanbul's markets, she entered the Topkapi Palace as just another concubine. But where others saw limits, Hurrem saw leverage. Her first move, refusing to fade into the background after bearing her first son. Tradition demanded concubines be replaced after childbirth, yet Hurrem clung to Suleiman's favor with a blend of intellect and audacity that left courtiers speechless. Her real power lay in dismantling centuries of protocol. When Suleiman made her his legal wife in 1534, it wasn't just romantic, it was revolutionary. No sultan had married a former concubine since the empire's early days. This wasn't love alone, it was strategy. As a wife, Hurrem gained something no harem favorite had ever secured: permanence. She hosted ambassadors in her own chambers, corresponded with kings like Poland's Sigismund II, and even influenced military campaigns. Venetian diplomats wrote home in disbelief, noting how Suleiman consulted her on matters of war and peace as if she were a vizier. Yet Hurrem's brilliance extended beyond politics. She built mosques, bathhouses, and soup kitchens across Istanbul, not just as acts of piety, but as networks of influence. Every fountain she commissioned bore her name, etching her legacy into the city's stones. While Roxolana used charity to craft a benevolent image, Hurrem turned philanthropy into a political weapon. Her endowment in Jerusalem, a towering soup kitchen that fed pilgrims, wasn't just charity. It was soft power, tying Ottoman authority to sacred geography. But her most ruthless calculations happened closer to home. To secure her son Selim's succession, she allegedly orchestrated the downfall of Suleiman's beloved firstborn, Mustafa. Poisoned letters, whispered rumors of treason. The tools of her trade were subtle but lethal. When Mustafa was strangled by his father's guards in 1553, Hurrem's victory was complete. Yet unlike Agrippina, she never lost control of the monster she helped create. Selim would rule and her lineage would endure. Hurrem's legacy wasn't just in palaces or policies, but in precedent. She proved that in the Ottoman world, a woman could be both the power behind the throne and the architect of its future. And as her influence echoed across Istanbul, another woman was rewriting the rules of empire far to the east, not through marriage or motherhood, but by turning a Mughal emperor's love into absolute authority. Her name, Nur Jahan, the huntress empress who ruled India with a rifle in one hand and a royal seal in the other. Zenobia of Palmyra didn't just defy Rome, she rewrote its map. In the chaotic 3rd century, as plague and civil war gutted the empire, this desert queen saw weakness and seized her moment. With her husband Odenathus dead, she didn't retreat into mourning like Roman widows were expected to. Instead, she crowned her young son emperor and declared herself regent, then did the unthinkable, marched her armies into Egypt, the breadbasket of Rome. Within months, her forces controlled territory from the Nile to the Bosporus, a dagger aimed at Rome's heart. But Zenobia wasn't just a warlord, she was a master propagandist. Coins minted under her rule showed her in imperial diadems, flanked by the titles Augusta and Augustus, while she spun a lineage straight from Cleopatra herself. Whether she truly believed the connection mattered less than its symbolism, by tying herself to Egypt's last pharaoh, Zenobia turned rebellion into a restoration, framing her conquests not as theft but as reclamation. Rome's historians dismissed her as an upstart, but Zenobia's brilliance lay in how she weaponized her femininity. Where Boudica had leaned into fury, Zenobia cultivated mystique. She spoke 4 languages, hosted philosophers at her court, and claimed descent not just from Cleopatra, but from the mythic Dido of Carthage, another woman who defied Rome. Her court at Palmyra became a glittering hybrid of Roman and Persian styles, a deliberate challenge to Rome's cultural supremacy. Even her military strategy played with expectations. When Emperor Aurelian finally marched east to crush her, she didn't meet him head-on. She lured his legions into the Syrian desert, letting heat and distance weaken them before striking. It nearly worked until betrayal from her own generals turned the tide. Captured and paraded through Rome in golden chains, Zenobia's end is shrouded in legend. Some say she starved herself, others claim she married a Roman senator and faded into obscurity. But her legacy outlasted the empire she challenged, because while Rome absorbed Palmyra back into its grasp, Zenobia proved something revolutionary. A woman could be both scholar and general, both queen and conqueror. And as her story faded into history, another woman was proving that resistance didn't always require armies. Sometimes the deadliest rebellions were fought with ink and intrigue, like the Byzantine princess Anna Komnene, who turned exile into a literary dagger aimed at her brother's throne. Livia Drusilla didn't just marry Rome's first emperor, she engineered him. At 19, she divorced her first husband while 6 months pregnant, abandoning a powerful aristocratic family to wed Octavian, the man who would become Augustus. This wasn't romance, it was a merger. For the next 5 decades, Livia wielded influence so subtle historians still debate its boundaries. While later empresses like Agrippina ruled through overt scheming, Livia mastered something far more potent, the art of appearing harmless. She cloaked her ambition in woolen stolas and pious devotion, playing the ideal Roman matron so convincingly that even Augustus called her "my little nest of virtue." But beneath that demure facade lay a mind sharper than any dagger in the Senate. Her methods were surgical. Unlike the poison-obsessed Agrippina, Livia preferred psychological manipulation. When Augustus hesitated over naming an heir, she didn't demand her son Tiberius be chosen. She simply arranged for rivals to self-destruct. Marcellus, Augustus's beloved nephew, dead at 20 of mysterious illness. Gaius and Lucius, the emperor's grandsons, perished on military campaigns under suspicious circumstances. By the time Tiberius emerged as the only viable successor, even Augustus seemed to forget Livia had orchestrated the entire chessboard. Roman historians like Tacitus whispered of poisoned figs and tainted honey, but the genius of Livia's reign was its deniability. Every death could be explained, every power shift appeared inevitable. Her true masterpiece was her public image. While later imperial women flaunted their influence, Livia built shrines to feminine purity and spun herself as the moral compass of Rome. She refused extravagant jewels, instead funding statues of virtuous women from legend. When Augustus banned adultery, Livia became its chief enforcer, conveniently eliminating wives who might bear rival heirs. Her modest villa on the Palatine Hill stood in pointed contrast to the palaces of decadent aristocrats, a living rebuke to their excess. This wasn't just hypocrisy, it was performance art. By embodying traditional values, she made her unprecedented power seem not just acceptable, but necessary. Yet for all her subtlety, Livia's legacy has a dark twist. When Augustus died in 14 AD, rumors swirled that she'd hastened his end with poisoned figs, not for power, but because he'd discovered her schemes. Tiberius, her own son, grew to resent her control, reportedly refusing her political advice with the icy remark, "A woman's place is at home." In the end, even Rome's greatest actress couldn't escape the script she'd helped write. But where Livia worked through whispers, the next woman on our list ruled through terror unashamed. Meet Fredigund of Francia, who didn't bother hiding the bodies, she displayed them as warnings. Mary of Burgundy was only 25 when she died, yet in her brief reign, she altered the destiny of Europe with the precision of a master tactician. Thrust onto the chessboard of power after her father Charles the Bold's death in 1477, Mary inherited a realm on the brink of collapse. Burgundy's cities were in revolt. France's King Louis XI circled like a vulture, and her own nobility questioned whether a teenage duchess could hold the fractured territories together. But Mary didn't just survive, she rewrote the rules of the game. Her first move, the Great Privilege of 1477, a charter granting unprecedented rights to rebellious Flemish cities. Where her father had ruled with an iron fist, Mary bartered autonomy for loyalty, trading feudal privileges for the one thing she needed most, time. That time bought her a far more daring gambit, a marriage that would redraw the continent's borders. Suitors lined up from London to Vienna, but Mary's choice was calculated chaos. She spurned Louis XI's son, the safest option, and instead wed Maximilian of Habsburg, a penniless archduke with ambition as vast as his family's crest. To outsiders, it seemed reckless. In reality, it was genius. The Habsburgs were Europe's ultimate opportunists, and with their armies at her back, Mary turned the tables on France overnight. The wedding wasn't just a union, it was a seismic shift. Burgundy's lands would eventually fuse with Habsburg holdings, forging an empire where the sun never set. But Mary's true legacy lies in what she refused to do. When her subjects in Ghent demanded she annul the Habsburg marriage, she didn't bend. When Louis XI invaded, she didn't flee. Even heavily pregnant, she rode through icy streets to rally troops, proving steel ran beneath her velvet gowns. Her tragic death in a hunting accident in 1482 cut her story short, yet the consequences of her choices echoed for centuries. Her son Philip would inherit not just Burgundy, but through his own marriage, Spain, laying the groundwork for Charles V's globe-spanning empire. Mary's reign was a masterclass in turning vulnerability into leverage. She inherited chaos but left behind a blueprint. Sometimes the most powerful move isn't conquest, but knowing which alliance will conquer for you. And as Burgundy's tapestry unraveled, another woman picked up the threads, Isabella of Castile, who transformed a fractured kingdom into the spearhead of a new world. Tamar of Georgia didn't just wear a crown, she forced history to bend its knee. When her father declared her co-ruler in 1178, the nobility balked. A woman on the throne, unthinkable, yet by the time of her death they'd anointed her Meep king, not queen, a title heavy with masculine authority. This wasn't semantics, it was a revolution. Tamar understood that in a world where power was coded male, she couldn't just rule. She had to redefine what ruling looked like. Her reign began with a purge. Nobles who questioned her right to the throne found their lands redistributed to loyal generals. The church, initially wary, became her staunchest ally after she defended Orthodox Christianity against invading Muslims. But Tamar's true brilliance lay in her reforms. She established Georgia's first appellate courts, ensuring justice wasn't just for the aristocracy. Her military campaigns expanded borders further than any Georgian monarch before her, yet she insisted soldiers spare civilians, a rarity in medieval warfare. Even her divorce was strategic. When her abusive first husband, the Russian Prince Yuri, rallied rebels against her, she didn't just exile him. She had their marriage annulled by a church council, a scandalous move that only bolstered her reputation as a ruler who prized stability over tradition. The paradoxes pile up. A divinely anointed monarch who codified protections for peasant women, a warrior queen canonized as a saint despite breaking marital vows. A ruler whose golden age birthed epic poetry like the knight in the panther's skin, yet whose own story was nearly erased by later historians. Modern Georgia venerates her, but the full scope of her cunning is often softened into hagiography. Because Tamar's legacy isn't just about battles won or laws passed, it's about the quiet ruthlessness of a woman who made king sound like her birthright. And as Georgia's golden age faded, another saintly schemer was rising in the West, a woman who'd wield piety like a scalpel to carve her own path to power. Meet Matilda of Tuscany, the papal kingmaker who held emperors hostage with nothing but her wit and a castle full of secrets. Isabella of Castile didn't just unite Spain, she forged it in fire and faith. When she married Ferdinand of Aragon in 1469, it wasn't a love story, it was a corporate merger. Their joint motto, Tanto Monte, Monte Tanto, equal in all things, was less a romantic pledge than a shareholder agreement. Together, they pooled kingdoms, armies, and ambitions, but Isabella always kept the ledger. While Ferdinand waged wars, she mastered the quieter arts of control, rewriting legal codes, auditing tax rolls, and most crucially, weaponizing piety. The Spanish Inquisition wasn't just about rooting out heresy, it was her crowbar for prying loose wealth and loyalty. When Jewish and Muslim subjects were expelled or forced to convert, their confiscated properties filled royal coffers, funding her pet project, a Genos adventurer named Columbus. Yet here's the twist, Isabella's zeal wasn't purely fanaticism, it was branding. In a fractured peninsula still reeling from centuries of Moorish rule, Catholicism became her unifying narrative. The Inquisition's tribunals weren't merely torture chambers, they were propaganda spectacles, broadcasting the crown's absolute authority to every corner of Spain. Even her famed piety had a political edge. By portraying herself as God's chosen purifier, she outmaneuvered rival nobles who might have resisted a female monarch's reforms. But was she truly devout or ruthlessly pragmatic? Consider the Alhambra decree of 1492, expelling Jews who refused baptism. While framed as religious duty, its timing was suspiciously convenient, just months before Columbus's voyage, which required massive funding. Coincidence or a calculated emptying of rival financial networks? Even her confessor, the fire and brimstone Torquemada, served dual roles, spiritual advisor and debt collector for the crown. Isabella's legacy is a paradox. She championed education for women, yet burned books deemed heretical. She funded a voyage that reshaped the globe, yet presided over cultural genocide. Modern Spain still grapples with this duality, celebrating her as the architect of a golden age while recoiling from its cost. And as Spain's flames of intolerance spread, another ruler was proving unity didn't require brutality. Enter Suleiman's mother, Hafsa Sultan, who turned the Ottoman court's diversity into its greatest strength without a single auto-da-fe. Razia Sultana didn't just inherit Delhi's throne, she seized it from the jaws of tradition. When her father, Sultan Iltutmish, named her his heir in 1231, the nobles recoiled. A woman ruling the Delhi Sultanate, unthinkable, yet Razia refused to be a placeholder. She traded veils for tunics, rode elephants into battle like her male predecessors, and minted coins proclaiming herself sultana, not just sultan's daughter. This wasn't just symbolism, it was survival. In a court where every whisper questioned her legitimacy, Razia understood that to be seen as equal, she had to embody the role utterly, right down to the armor. Her reign was a whirlwind of reform. She opened schools for girls, hired Hindu generals, and cracked down on corrupt officials' policies that won her the people's love but sealed her fate with the nobility. The chronicler Minhaj-i-Siraj wrote of her sharp intellect and fearless justice, but also noted the simmering rage of aristocrats whose privileges she stripped. Their revenge came in 1240. Betrayed by her own governor, Razia was captured and forced to marry her usurper, a humiliation designed to erase her authority. But this was no tragic end. She rallied her remaining troops, fought back, and died sword in hand, a warrior to the last. Why does Razia's story linger in obscurity while Elina of Aquitaine or Isabella of Castile dominate Western narratives? Partly because history favors winners and Razia's dynasty crumbled after her, but there's another truth. Her very existence challenged too many myths. A Muslim woman wielding secular power, a ruler who rejected Persia to hold open court. Colonial historians and even modern textbooks often reduce her to a footnote, framing her as an anomaly rather than a blueprint. Yet her legacy echoes in unexpected places. Take the pirate queen Sayyida Al-Hura, who also donned male attire to command fleets, proof that Razia wasn't alone in her defiance. Because while Delhi's nobles buried her story, the strategy of rewriting the rules lived on. And as we'll see next, one woman took that playbook further, turning not just her clothes but her entire identity into a weapon. Her name, Hurrem Sultan, the slave who became an empire's architect. Christina of Sweden didn't just rule, she rewrote the entire script of queenship, then burned it in front of Europe's stunned nobility. Crowned at 6 after her father's death in battle, she was raised as a prince in all but name, studying philosophy, languages, and swordplay while her advisors prepared her to lead a Protestant empire. But by 28, she'd done the unthinkable, abdicated, converted to Catholicism, and fled to Rome in a scandal that rocked the continent. Was this a spiritual awakening or the ultimate power play? The clues lie in her contradictions. This was a queen who hosted Descartes at her court, yet grew bored when his lectures ran too long, who dressed in men's breeches but commissioned portraits dripping in pearls, who swore eternal chastity yet surrounded herself with intimate female companions like the Countess Ebba Spa, their letters brimming with longing. Her abdication wasn't surrender, it was liberation. Sweden's strict Lutheran clergy had clashed with her intellectual curiosity, while the weight of dynastic expectations pressed like a crown of thorns. By converting to Catholicism, Christina wasn't just rejecting her throne. She was rejecting the very idea that a woman's worth lay in marriage or motherhood. In Rome, she became a patron of the arts, filling her palazzo with astronomers and playwrights, turning exile into a salon of radical thought. When the Vatican pressured her to marry, she quipped, "I'd rather be the mistress of my own mind than the wife of any king." Yet even her freedom was a performance. Her later plots to seize Naples or even the Polish throne reveal a woman who didn't hate power, just the cages others built for it. Christina's true legacy, proving that sometimes the most cunning move is walking away. And as she faded into Roman twilight, another queen was proving the opposite, that power wasn't something to abandon, but something to seize with both hands. Enter Catherine the Great, who didn't just inherit an empire, she stole it. Anne Boleyn didn't just catch Henry VIII's eye, she rewrote the rules of desire itself. When she returned from the French court in 1522, she brought more than just elegant manners. She carried a new kind of power play. Unlike the docile noblewomen of England, Anne wielded her wit like a rapier, dancing between flirtation and refusal with precision. She wouldn't be another mistress quietly tucked away like her sister Mary. No, Anne demanded marriage or nothing, a gamble so audacious it reshaped a kingdom. Her evangelical faith wasn't just piety, it was strategy. By aligning with reformers like Thomas Cromwell, she turned religious upheaval into leverage, whispering in Henry's ear that breaking with Rome wasn't just about divorce, it was about destiny. But here's what most miss: Anne's real genius was in the theater of her own reign. She didn't just wear French hoods, she turned fashion into propaganda, her sleek silhouette a rebuke to Catherine of Aragon's stiff Spanish gowns. When she finally became queen in 1533, her coronation pageants flaunted symbols of fertility, pomegranates, roses, a not-so-subtle promise of the son Henry craved. Even her patronage was cunning. She funded scholars who translated the Bible into English, quietly undermining the clergy's monopoly on scripture while endearing herself to reformist factions. Yet the very traits that lifted Anne doomed her. Her sharp tongue, once charming, became shrewishness in the eyes of a king growing impatient for an heir. When she miscarried a son in 1536, Henry's favor curdled into suspicion. The charges adultery, incest, even witchcraft were absurd, but their brutality revealed a deeper truth. Anne's power had always been precarious, built on a king's whim and a court's jealousy. Her execution in May 1536 was swift, but the axe didn't erase her influence, because Anne's greatest victory lay beyond the scaffold. Her daughter, Elizabeth I, would inherit not just her mother's dark eyes but her political instincts. The same flair for spectacle, the same mastery of symbolism, these became the tools of England's golden age. Was Anne's reign a failure, or did she plant seeds that bloomed long after her death? The answer lies in the echoes of her defiance, in a daughter who proved that a woman could rule not despite her mother's scandal, but because of its lessons. And as the tower's gates closed behind Anne, another woman was learning those lessons too well, a queen who'd face her own execution with the same chilling poise. Her name, Mary, Queen of Scots, and her story would twist the knife of history even deeper. Marie Antoinette never actually said, "Let them eat cake," but that fabricated quote tells us everything about how history remembers her. Dismissed as a frivolous spendthrift while France hurtled toward revolution, the Austrian queen was far more than a symbol of excess. Behind the gilded doors of Versailles, she was playing a dangerous diplomatic game. While her husband Louis XVI hesitated, Marie Antoinette became the monarchy's secret conduit to foreign powers. using her Habsburg connections to secure covert French support for the American Revolution. Why? To weaken Britain, France's eternal rival. The muskets that won Yorktown, many were funded through back-channel negotiations she facilitated, yet her political instincts faltered at home. When bread shortages sparked riots, her well-intentioned but tone-deaf reforms, like replacing the palace's gold-trimmed carriages with plain ones, only fueled public rage. The people saw not austerity but theater. Herein lies the tragedy. Marie Antoinette grasped international chessboards but misread her own streets. Her infamous diamond necklace scandal, where courtiers framed her for embezzlement, exposed a deeper truth. The Queen had become a lightning rod for centuries of resentment toward the monarchy's excesses, resentment that should have been aimed at systemic corruption, not just one woman's shopping habits. History often blames queens for failures that were never theirs alone. France's financial crisis, decades in the making, worsened by wars and tax evasion by nobles. But it was Marie's head that rolled, not those of the ministers who'd mismanaged the treasury. Even her final act, allegedly stepping on her executioner's foot with a whispered apology, was twisted. Some called it grace, others proof she never understood the revolution's fury. Yet for all her missteps, Marie Antoinette's story is also one of survival tactics. In her last years, she secretly corresponded with monarchs across Europe, plotting escapes and counter-revolutions. When the mob stormed Versailles, she alone kept calm, directing her children's flight while Louis froze. That steeliness hints at what might have been had she been born in a less combustible era. And as the guillotine's shadow fell, another queen was proving survival required more than diplomacy. It demanded reinvention. Enter Catherine the Great, who didn't just navigate a coup but orchestrated one to claim her throne. Catherine the Great didn't just inherit an empire, she stole it with the precision of a philosopher and the audacity of a gambler. Born a minor German princess, she arrived in Russia as a teenage bride to the hapless Peter III, a man more obsessed with toy soldiers than statecraft. While he played at war games, Catherine studied. She devoured Enlightenment texts, cultivated alliances with disgruntled generals, and bided her time. Then, in 1762, with Peter's unpopularity at its peak, she struck, not with an army at first, but with words. Her manifesto, drafted with the help of her lover Grigory Orlov, framed the coup as a rescue mission saving Russia from her husband's incompetence. By dawn, Peter was under arrest and within days, dead under mysterious circumstances. The message was clear. This was no mere regency. Catherine would rule in her own right, and she'd do it by rewriting the rules of legitimacy. Her reign became a masterclass in enlightened despotism. She corresponded with Voltaire, trading flattery and ideas, casting herself as Europe's philosopher queen while expanding Russia's borders with relentless campaigns. The Potemkin villages, those glittering facades erected to impress foreign dignitaries, weren't just propaganda. They were performance art. Catherine understood that perception was power, and if a row of painted houses could convince the world of Russia's prosperity, the illusion was as good as reality. Yet behind the spectacle lay real reforms. She modernized legal codes, championed education for women, and even toyed with abolishing serfdom until a peasant revolt reminded her that some Enlightenment ideals were too dangerous to implement. Then there were the lovers. Unlike the discreet affairs of other monarchs, Catherine's relationships were political theater. Each favorite, from the dashing Potemkin to the younger Platon Zubov, was a calculated choice. Potemkin, her greatest love and strategist, became a de facto co-ruler, overseeing the annexation of Crimea. Their letters, dripping with passion and policy, reveal a partnership that blurred the lines between pillow talk and statecraft. But when his influence waned, Catherine didn't hesitate to replace him. Romance for her was never just personal, it was another lever of control. What makes Catherine extraordinary isn't just her ruthlessness, but her ability to spin it into legacy. She didn't just conquer Crimea and Poland, she framed her wars as civilizing missions. She didn't just silence dissent, she patronized artists who painted her as Minerva, goddess of wisdom. Even her failures, like the disastrous smallpox inoculation she tested on peasants, were recast as noble experiments. By the time of her death in 1796, she'd transformed Russia from a backward kingdom into a global power, all while maintaining the fiction that she was merely a humble student of the Enlightenment. But for all her brilliance, Catherine's story raises a haunting question. Can a ruler be both enlightened and tyrannical? Because while she penned essays on liberty, millions of serfs remained in chains. And as her contradictions echo through history, another intellectual ruler waits in the wings, one who wielded a pen mightier than any sword. Meet Christina of Sweden, the queen who traded a crown for a library and proved that sometimes the most radical power move is walking away. Maria Theresa didn't just inherit an empire, she fought tooth and nail to keep it from unraveling. At 23, she ascended to the Habsburg throne in 1740, only to find Europe's wolves circling. Prussia's Frederick the Great saw her as weak, invading Silesia within months. Bavaria and France joined the feast, carving up her lands like a prize. But Maria Theresa refused to play the victim. With no military training, she rode into Pressburg's Hungarian Diet, her newborn son in her arms, and delivered a speech so stirring the nobles pledged their swords. This wasn't just desperation, it was theater. She knew legitimacy wasn't handed down, it was performed. Her real weapon, the cradle. 16 children might sound like dynastic excess, but Maria Theresa turned motherhood into geopolitics. Daughters like Marie Antoinette were pawns in continental chess, married off to secure French neutrality. Sons like Leopold II became Grand Dukes of Tuscany, anchoring Habsburg influence in Italy. Even her less famous offspring served as bargaining chips, their betrothals sealing alliances from Naples to Brussels. Yet behind the matrimonial maneuvering lay genuine affection. Her letters reveal a woman who agonized over sending children abroad, yet never flinched from the calculus of power. Reform was her silent rebellion. While Frederick waged wars, Maria Theresa rebuilt. She centralized Austria's chaotic administration, standardized taxes, and established the first public schools, not out of altruism, but because educated subjects made better taxpayers and soldiers. Her pragmatic sanction wasn't just a legal trick to secure her succession. It redefined the Habsburg state as a unified entity rather than a patchwork of feudal fiefs. Even her piety had an edge. She banned Jesuit influence in education not to spite the church, but to reclaim control over the minds of her people. The contradictions fascinate. She enforced brutal serfdom yet abolished torture. She decried Prussia's aggression but partitioned Poland without remorse. This wasn't hypocrisy, it was pragmatism. Maria Theresa ruled with the clear-eyed ruthlessness of a woman who knew empires weren't preserved by ideals alone. And as her reign waned, another woman was proving that birthright wasn't the only path to power. Enter Catherine the Great, who didn't inherit a throne, she seized one, rewriting the rules of legitimacy with every step she took. Nur Jahan didn't just whisper in her husband's ear, she built an empire behind the veil of his opium haze. When the Mughal Emperor Jahangir succumbed to addiction, his Persian bride transformed his weakness into her weapon. While history remembers her as the queen who hunted tigers, her real prey was far more elusive, absolute power in a society that demanded women stay unseen. Born Maya un-Nisa, she rose from refugee to regent, turning the harem's silken walls into a war room. her official title, Empress, her real role, Shadow Sultan. Trade was her first chess move, securing monopolies on luxury goods like indigo and silver. Nur Jahan didn't just accumulate wealth, she rewrote India's economy. European merchants seethed as she cornered markets, her royal seals on cargo ships carrying spices to Persia and textiles to Arabia. Even the coins bore her mark, inscribed with the unprecedented phrase, "By order of the Queen." But her genius lay in subtlety. While Jahangir's courtiers dismissed her as a frivolous patron of perfumes, she was quietly buying loyalty. When nobles grumbled about her influence, they suddenly found their debts forgiven or their daughters married into her faction. Then came the hunting party's spectacles designed to dazzle and intimidate. Riding elephants through the Punjab, Nur Jahan didn't just shoot leopards, she staged sovereignty. Chroniclers describe her standing over a slain beast, rifle smoking, while ambassadors knelt in the dust. These weren't sporting events, they were performances of unchecked authority, proof that a woman could command both court and wilderness. Even her architecture whispered power. The tomb she built for her parents in Agra, a marble masterpiece overshadowing Jahangir's own mausoleum, wasn't just filial piety. It was a stone declaration. The Empress's lineage would outshine the emperor's, yet Nur Jahan's downfall came from the same source as her rise, loyalty. When Jahangir died, she backed the wrong prince, her stepson Shah Jahan. His gratitude, exiled to Lahore, where she spent her final years plotting revenge through poetry. But here's the twist: her exile became another kind of victory. Freed from the constraints of court, she penned verses that mocked her enemies' short memories. They think me buried, yet my words dig tunnels under their thrones. And as her ink-stained vengeance simmered, another widow was sharpening her own blade half a world away. Enter Roxilana, the slave who turned a sultan's obsession into an Ottoman revolution. Cleopatra VII didn't just charm Rome's most powerful men, she played them like pieces on a Mediterranean chessboard. Her legendary romances with Julius Caesar and Mark Antony weren't star-crossed passions. They were calculated survival tactics in a world where Egypt's independence hung by a thread. When she first met Caesar, rolled into his chambers hidden in a carpet, it wasn't seduction, it was theater. The 21-year-old queen, ousted by her brother's faction, needed a Roman army to reclaim her throne. Caesar, fresh from crossing the Rubicon, needed Egypt's grain to feed his legions. Their alliance was less about love than mutual desperation. She bore him a son, Ptolemy Caesarion, not just as a lover's token but as a living treaty, a fusion of Roman and Ptolemaic bloodlines that could legitimize her rule. Yet Cleopatra's true brilliance lay beyond the bedroom. Fluent in 9 languages, she was the first Ptolemy in 3 centuries to speak Egyptian, a deliberate nod to her subjects that shattered her dynasty's aloof Greek elitism. Her economic reforms stabilized a kingdom drowning in debt. She debased currency to ease inflation, reopened Red Sea trade routes, and even experimented with state monopolies on olive oil. When famine struck, she emptied royal granaries, not out of altruism, but because a starving populace doesn't pay taxes. Roman poets like Virgil painted her as a decadent temptress, but Egyptian temple reliefs tell a different story. At Dendera, she's depicted not as a Greek interloper but as the goddess Isis incarnate, nursing her son in a tableau of divine kingship. The contrast with Rome's propaganda couldn't be starker. While Cicero sneered at her foreign superstitions, Alexandrian scholars flocked to her court, where she debated astronomy and medicine. Her suicide by asp wasn't the act of a heartbroken woman. It was the final move of a strategist who knew Octavian would parade her in chains. Better to die as Egypt's pharaoh than live as Rome's trophy, and therein lies her enduring paradox. the woman Rome vilified as a harlot was the same ruler whose subjects fought to the death defending her palace. As the last light of Egyptian sovereignty faded with Cleopatra's death, another woman was rising in the east, one who'd turn Rome's own tactics against it. Meet Zenobia of Palmyra, the desert queen who dared to declare herself Caesar's equal. The Trung sisters didn't just resist China's Han dynasty, they rewrote the rules of rebellion itself. In 40 AD, when Chinese governors taxed Vietnamese peasants into starvation and flogged Trung Trac's husband to death for protesting, the sisters didn't mourn. They mobilized, gathering 30,000 fighters, many of them women. They stormed citadels from the Red River Delta to the Kue Long, driving the Han occupiers north in a lightning revolt that carved out an independent Vietnam for 3 defiant years. Imagine the scene: Trung Trac, heavily pregnant, leading cavalry charges in golden armor while her sister Trung Nechai commanded naval fleets down river. This wasn't just warfare, it was theater, a spectacle of female power designed to shatter every assumption about women's roles in battle. Their brief reign was as revolutionary as their tactics. They abolished Confucian taxes, installed women as generals, and ruled as dual queens, a concept so radical that Chinese chroniclers dismissed them as she-devils, while Vietnamese ballads immortalized them as the dragon lords of the South. But when the Han Empire returned with crushing force in 43 AD, the sisters faced their ultimate choice: surrender or sovereignty. On the banks of the Hat River, they clasped hands and leaped to their deaths, their final act a refusal to be paraded as trophies through Chang'an streets. Modern Hanoi venerates them as feminist icons. Their statues loom outside government buildings, swords raised toward China, but their legacy transcends gender. They proved rebellion could bloom even in the harshest soil. Compare them to the Agoge of Dahomey, West Africa's all-female warriors who terrorized colonial armies, or the Celtic queen Boudica, whose revolt against Rome also ended in defiant suicide. Yet the Trung stand apart because their story wasn't erased. While Boudica's name survived through Roman historians who vilified her, the Trungs were celebrated by the very people they freed, their ballads passed down like heirlooms. Their suicide, often framed as tragedy, was actually their masterstroke. In Confucian tradition, a noble death cleansed shame and cemented legacy. By choosing the river, they weaponized their bodies one last time, ensuring their defiance would echo louder than any defeat. Today, when Vietnamese schoolgirls recite their oath, first, avenge the nation; second, restore the Hung lineage; third, avenge our husbands; fourth, achieve these goals or die trying. They're not memorizing history, they're inheriting a blueprint. And as the Han swallowed Vietnam once more, another sister duo was sharpening their knives half a world away: the Byzantine princesses Anna Komnene and Maria of Elina, who turned their gilded prison into a plotting chamber. Sorgatoni Beki didn't just navigate the Mongol Empire's cutthroat politics, she rewired its future from the shadows. As the widow of Genghis Khan's youngest son, Tolui, she inherited no territory, only 4 sons and a web of rival factions hungry for power. Yet by her death in 1252, she'd orchestrated a dynasty that stretched from Beijing to Baghdad. How? By mastering the art of playing the long game in an empire built on swift conquest. While Mongol warlords slashed their way to glory, Sorgatoni wielded subtler tools: strategic marriages, religious patronage, and an uncanny knack for picking winning allies. Her greatest coup, backing her brother-in-law Urgeday's rival Guyuk for conship, then pivoting to support his enemy Mernk when the winds shifted, a move that secured her son's fortunes without drawing a single sword. Religious tolerance was her secret weapon. In an era when most rulers imposed their faith, Sorgatani funded Nestorian Christian churches, Buddhist monasteries, and Islamic madrasas across the steppes. This wasn't piety, it was politics. By positioning herself as a neutral patron, she built loyalty among conquered populations, while Mongol warlords alienated them with forced conversions. Persian historian Rashid al-Din marveled at her ability to make the Uyghur scribe and the Persian vizier kneel as willingly as the Mongol archer. Her sons inherited this pragmatism. Kublai Khan's multicultural Yuan dynasty, Hulagu's Ilkhanate embracing Persian bureaucracy, these weren't accidents. They were lessons learned at their mother's knee. Yet for all her influence, Sorgatani remains overshadowed by her male relatives. Why? Because her power didn't fit the conqueror mold. She never led charges or drank from skull cups like Genghis. Instead, she worked through proxies and paperwork, the less cinematic tools of empire building. Even her greatest achievement, ensuring all 4 sons became Khans, was framed as maternal duty rather than political genius. Modern historians often reduce her to a supportive mother, ignoring how she outmaneuvered battle-hardened generals at every turn. Her legacy whispers a provocative truth: real power isn't always seized with a sword. Sometimes it's stitched into the fabric of an empire through patience, pragmatism, and the quiet elevation of the right heirs. And as the Mongol Empire fractured into rival khanates, one question lingers: would it have crumbled so fast if more had listened to the woman who'd held it together? From the steppes of Mongolia to the courts of Versailles, these cunning women wielded power with a shared arsenal of tactics, proving that brilliance transcends borders. Religion wasn't just faith, it was a political lever. Wu Zetian draped herself in Buddhist prophecies, while Isabella of Castile turned Catholicism into a crowbar for consolidating authority. Even in exile, Christina of Sweden used her conversion to Catholicism as a shield against Protestant expectations, showing how spiritual allegiance could be as fluid as the tides of power. The lesson: divine legitimacy wasn't just inherited. It was manufactured, whether through commissioning sacred texts, building grand mosques, or performing public acts of piety designed to resonate with the masses. Violence, too, followed a calculated rhythm. Agrippina's poisons and Fredigund's daggers weren't mindless brutality. They were surgical strikes, eliminating threats while maintaining plausible deniability. Compare their methods to Catherine de Medici's St. Bartholomew's Day massacre, a bloodbath meant to cripple opposition, not just punish it. These women understood that controlled terror could solidify power more effectively than open warfare. The key distinction: their violence was rarely impulsive. It was a tool deployed with the precision of a chess master sacrificing pawns to protect the queen. Marriage, often dismissed as a patriarchal trap, became their ultimate bargaining chip. Maria Theresa turned 16 childbirths into a geopolitical strategy, weaving a web of alliances through her children's unions. Elina of Aquitaine's divorce from Louis VII wasn't a personal failure. It was a tactical retreat, freeing her to marry Henry Plantagenet and double her dominions. And Razia Sultana, she rejected marriage entirely, donning male attire to sidestep the constraints of wedlock. Whether embracing matrimony or rejecting it, these rulers treated marriage as a contract, not a cage. Image crafting, though, was their most universal weapon. Cleopatra's carpet entrance, Theodora's charitable endowments, even Marie Antoinette's ill-fated attempts at rustic charm, all were carefully staged performances. Hurrem Sultan didn't just build soup kitchens, she etched her name into Istanbul's stones, ensuring her influence outlasted whispers of her scheming. The pattern is clear. In eras when women's authority was questioned, visibility became survival. They didn't just rule, they curated their legends, knowing history is written not by the powerful, but by those who control the narrative. What's startling isn't just their shared tactics, but the shared constraints that birthed them. Whether in Confucian China or Catholic Europe, these women faced systems designed to exclude them, systems they hacked with startling consistency. Their solutions weren't just clever, they were necessary. When legal codes barred them from thrones, they ruled through suns or shadows. When chroniclers dismissed them as seductresses, they weaponized that very sexuality. Even their failures, Agrippina's murder by Nero, Marie Antoinette's guillotine, reveal the precarious tightrope they walked. Too much ambition risked backlash, too little meant oblivion. Yet their legacies endure, not despite these contradictions, but because of them. They force us to ask uncomfortable questions. Can ruthlessness be righteous when survival demands it? Is manipulation justified when the alternative is erasure? The answers are as complex as the women themselves, because while their methods varied, some wielded daggers, others diplomacy, their goal was universal: to carve a space for agency in worlds determined to deny it. And as we close this chapter, one truth lingers: their stories aren't relics, they're blueprints reminding us that power isn't given, it's taken, and sometimes it's taken quietly from the shadows by those history tried to silence.